Good evening, everyone. My name is Inakshi Sopti, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Asia Society India Center. I'm delighted to see members, patrons, and friends from across the world join us this evening. Welcome. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Asia Society is a leading educational organization dedicated to building awareness about policy, business, education, technology, sustainability, and the arts from across Asia on a global stage. Inaugurated in 2006 by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, the India Center has hosted over 800 events, establishing itself as an important forum for the discussion of regional and global affairs. Our initiatives include policy roundtables, CEO forums, public lectures, leadership programs, cultural summits, film screenings, and our signature Asia Arts Game Changer Awards. Please do follow our website and social media handles to know more about the awards and other programs from across our 13 global centers. Religious and political socialization is a fascinating discipline. It not only traces the evolution of a society, but also studies its behaviors and choices and what these decisions have been based upon. Pew Research Center's new report, Religion in India, Tolerance and Segregation, studies the influence of religion on social behavior and beliefs, on political systems and electoral democracy in the country. The report provides us with nuanced findings about religion and caste in contemporary India and how these two social institutions remain the epicenter of our socio-economic and political evolution. The report throws up some interesting questions. Is an Indian identity the same as one's religious or caste identity? How does modern India perceive religion, and are there wide regional variations that emerge? Although interpreted differently, how do shared religious beliefs unite Indians of various faiths? And do these influence our political choices? We hope to navigate all this and more in our discussion this evening with an erudite and distinguished panel who I have the pleasure of introducing. Rajeev Bhargava is Professor of Political Theory and Indian Political Thought, a prolific writer and the Director of Parekh Institute of Indian Thought, Center for the Study of Developing Societies based in Delhi. Ashutosh Varshney is Sole Goldman Professor of International Studies and the Social Sciences and Professor of Political Science at Brown University, where he also directs the Center for Contemporary South Asia. Tulasi Srinivas is Professor of Anthropology, Religion and Transnational Studies at the Marlborough Institute of Interdisciplinary Studies at Emerson College. Neha Sahgal, the co-author of the report, is Associate Director of Research at Pew Research Center, specializing in international polling on religion. Abhinandan Sekhri, our moderator this evening, is the co-founder and CEO of News Laundry. He's also co-founded the production house Small Screen with Prashant Sareen. A quick note on housekeeping before we proceed. All those who are joining us on Zoom, please leave your questions in the Q&A box. For our audiences on Facebook, please drop them in the comments section. And with that, Neha, over to you.
Thank you, Inakshi, for that kind introduction, and thank you very much to the Asia Society for hosting us today. It is a pleasure to talk about the results of our Religion in India survey at the Pew Research Center. Go ahead and share the screen. All right, here we go. All right, quick introduction to the Pew Research Center before we begin. I won't bore you with all of these details, but I will emphasize that we are a non-partisan, non-advocacy institute, and we do not take any policy positions. So today's presentation will be very close to the data, but I will not make any normative statements. I won't say anything is good or bad for the country, and that is what we have our imminent panel for. I will stick to the data, which I know best. Our funding comes through the Pew Charitable Trust. And for this particular study, we also received funds from the John Templeton Foundation. That's actually a foundation that supports a lot of our religion work. I also want to emphasize that we study religion around the world through public opinion polling because we feel that religion is an important part of how societies see themselves and how they define their identity. We do not study religion because we want to promote religion or the lack of religion or any particular religion. And now on to the Religion in India survey. This is the culmination of roughly 30,000 interviews conducted nationally. We were able to complete the fieldwork just as the first wave of COVID infections was hitting India. But as a result of the rise in the COVID infections, we were not able to survey two states in the Northeast, Sikkim, as well as Manipur. In addition, Kashmir had already become inaccessible during this time. So keep in mind that those are exclusions. I'll also emphasize that the interview itself lasted on average 45 minutes. So today I'm just going to give you a few highlights, but there's a lot more in this study, for which I encourage you to go to pewresearch.org. Because of the large sample size of this survey and the way that the sample is designed, we are able to talk about the attitudes and opinions of the 6 major religious groups, including Buddhists and Jains, who are a very small portion of the population. Members of other religious groups, for example, Parsis or Jews, are included in this survey. However, we do not have enough interviews with them to be able to separately talk about their opinions. So just keep that in mind as you interpret some of the results. So what is the story of religion in India? Overall, we find that 2 things are happening at the same time in India. On the one hand, people express a high level of commitment to the principles of tolerance. At the same time, they say that they want to live religiously segregated lives with limited connections across religious groups. Both things happening at the same time suggest that Indians' concept of tolerance or pluralism is different from perhaps what we see in some other countries, maybe the United States or Europe, where people conceive of tolerance or pluralism as a melting pot, or they aspire to be a melting pot kind of society. Indians see their society as a patchwork quilt. They live together, but they do even tolerance. But while religious segregation and tolerance coexist in India, we also find that the desire for religious segregation is closely tied up with some of the fault lines we see in India today when it comes to attitudes toward identity as well as politics. So what I'm going to do is break down all 3 elements and show you some of the data that supports each of these assertions, beginning with the idea of tolerance, shared values, as well as beliefs. We find that the vast majority of Indians say that they are very free to practice their religion. This is the opinion we find among Hindus, but we also find that India's Muslims, Christians, and other religious groups say that they are very free to practice their religion. And in addition to this sense of religious freedom, we also find that Indians hold tolerance as a core value. They say that respecting all religions is very important to being truly Indian. And they also say that respecting other religions is an important part of their own religious identity. So for example, Muslims tell us that respecting other religions is an important part of what being a Muslim means to them, or for Christians, what being a Christian means to them. These values, as well as beliefs, are also accompanied by religious values that seemingly cross theological lines. So, for example, among Hindus, most people believe in karma, but we also find that most Muslims in India, in fact, an identical share of Muslims in India, also say that they believe in karma. So now you might say, well, karma has found its way into popular culture and it's really an Asian belief and not associated with any one particular religion. But also take a look at the results on whether people believe that the Ganges River has the power to purify. Of course, this is a quintessentially Hindu belief, but we also find that roughly a third of Christians say that the Ganges River has the power to purify. Now, despite these shared values, as well as some shared religious beliefs, we also find that India's religious groups perceive themselves as very different from each other. So among Hindus, 66% say that they are very different from India's Muslims, for example. And generally, Hindus see themselves as very different from Christians, as well as India's other religious communities. And it's the same pattern among Muslims. They return the sentiment. Generally, Muslims say that they are very different from the country's Hindus, and they also see themselves as different from India's other religious communities. So, of course, these are the 2 larger groups in India, and they share some history, which is checkered, at times peaceful, at times not. But this sentiment is a widespread trend among India's religious communities. Overall, the perception of difference seems to far outweigh the perception of similarity. There are some exceptions. So among Jains, for example, or among Sikhs, people generally see that they have a lot in common with Hindus. But generally, the trend is toward perceiving difference more than perceiving similarities. And this sense of difference is accompanied by religious segregation in people's daily lives. And one way we see this playing out is in how people feel about interreligious marriage. So even though people feel that it's important to be respectful of all religions, they feel strongly against interreligious marriage. They say it is very important to stop men and women in their community from marrying outside their religion. 2/3 of Hindus say it is important to stop Hindu men as well as Hindu women from marrying into other religions. And the sentiment is even more widespread among Muslims, where it reaches up to 80%, saying that Muslim women as well as Muslim men must be stopped from marrying into other religions. And it's not just about how people feel about interreligious marriage. We also find that people tend to confine their friendship circles to people in their own religious group. So they tell us either all their friends are of the same religion or most of their friends are of the same religion. So among Hindus, 86%, nearly a really huge share, say that they mostly are, or either entirely or mostly friends with other Hindus. But this is also true for small groups such as Jains and Buddhists, who basically just form a sliver of the population. So that's another way that religious segregation is playing out. Now, most people in India don't go so far as to say that their neighborhood should be religiously segregated. Still, we do find that for a significant share of people, they would rather keep certain other religious groups out of the neighborhood where they live. So 36% of Hindus say that they would not be willing to accept a Muslim as a neighbor. 31% say they wouldn't want a Christian as a neighbor, and just over a quarter say they wouldn't want a Sikh, a Buddhist, or a Jain as a neighbor. Altogether, we find that about 45% of Hindus would not want at least one of these religious groups in their neighborhood. And similarly, among Muslims, about a quarter or more saying that they wouldn't want a Christian, Sikh, Buddhist, or Jain in their neighborhood. And similarly, among other religious groups, where significant minorities would rather live in religiously segregated neighborhoods, including, for example, I'll point out among Jains, most people among Jains not wanting a Muslim neighbor. So what implications does this high level of religious segregation have in attitudes toward national identity as well as politics? Well, for one thing, we find that for India's Hindus, religion as well as national identity are closely linked together. 64% of Hindus say that being a Hindu is very important to being truly Indian. And a slim majority, 59%, say speaking Hindi is very important to being truly Indian. And these two elements of national identity, religion as well as language, are closely intertwined. So those who say being a Hindu is very important also tend to say that speaking Hindi is very important. And altogether, we find that about half of Hindus take both positions. They say both being a Hindu as well as speaking Hindi are very important to being truly Indian. And these attitudes are highly political. So one way we can see this playing out is in BJP's vote share. In the 2019 parliamentary election, we find that overall about half of Hindus say they voted for India's current ruling party, but BJP's vote share can vary considerably based on how people evaluate or feel about national identity. So among Hindus who say it is very important to be a Hindu, to be truly Indian, a majority say they voted for the BJP. But BJP's vote share falls significantly among those who say it's somewhat important to be a Hindu, to be truly Indian, and it falls further among those who don't see a connection between being a Hindu and being authentically Indian. If I were to show you the same bar chart for language or the importance of the Hindi language, you'll basically see the exact same pattern, which basically points to the close intertwining in India today among religion as well as language and politics, all three being closely intertwined. Altogether, we find that 30% of Hindus take all three positions. They say being a Hindu is very important to being truly Indian. They say speaking Hindi is very important to truly being Indian. And they voted for the BJP in the 2019 parliamentary election. This 30% is a distinct group. And they are distinct in many ways. They're distinct in that they are more religiously observant. Their regional distribution tends to vary quite a bit. The share goes up a lot if we go to the central and northern parts of the country. It's a lot smaller in the south. But one way that they are consistently different from other Hindus is how they feel about religious segregation. And this brings us back to where we began the story of religion and segregation in India. For this 30%, those who say they voted for the BJP and it is very important to be a Hindu and speak Hindi to be truly Indian, they desire a much more religiously segregated life than other Hindus. They are more likely to say they would not be willing to accept a Muslim as a neighbor, or a Christian as a neighbor, or even a Sikh, Buddhist, or a Jain neighbor. They are more likely to say all of their close friends are Hindu. And this feeling that interreligious marriage of Hindu women must be stopped, this sentiment is heightened among this group. So their religious segregation levels tend to be much higher than other Hindus. Religion is not the only line of division in Indian society. We also find that there is caste segregation in India that largely follows a very similar pattern. So to begin, of course, most Indians today identify with a caste. That's true for Hindus, but it's also true for Muslims, Christians, etc., with about a third of Christians identifying as scheduled caste, about a quarter identifying as scheduled tribe, and of course, among Buddhists, majority identifying as Dalits. And these are, of course, administrative categories, but they also have a lot of meaning for people in terms of identity. So here we ask people how important it is to stop women, and we also asked about men in their community from marrying into another caste, and you largely see the same pattern as religion. Most people saying this is very important, Muslims sharing, Muslims even more widespread sentiment than among Hindus. And if you look at the caste groups as well, same pattern, with most people feeling it is very important to stop inter-caste marriage. And now this next slide will also look familiar to you. People keep their friendship circles confined to members of their own caste, just like they keep their friendship circles confined to their people in their own religion. They say either all their close friends share their caste or most of their close friends share their caste, once again pointing to the high levels of segregation in Indian society along caste lines. But despite this segregation, we also find that most Dalits in India don't say that they experienced caste discrimination in the last 12 months. Some do. We do find that 1 in 5 Dalits do say that they experienced caste discrimination in the last 12 months. And this share varies quite a bit regionally. So if we go to the south of the country, 30% of Dalits say that they experienced discrimination on caste basis in the last 12 months. The share is even higher in the Northeast. Elsewhere, it's considerably lower, including just 8% in the West. That brings me to the end of my remarks. As I mentioned, there's a lot more in this report that we couldn't cover in today's presentation. I'll in particular point to vast regional differences among Hindus, particularly the North-South dividing line. We've also looked closely at Sikh identity. For this and more, I'd encourage you to go to pewresearch.org/India survey. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Neha, for that fascinating presentation. So many questions that come to mind, but before we get into the question answer session, and I would encourage everybody to put your questions in the chat box, which is the first button on your Zoom window from the right. Don't press the red button because then you leave the meeting. The one after that, the first on the right, it says Q&A. So many of you are putting your questions in the chat window. It would be easier for us if you just put it in the Q&A window. Now we'll have 3 presentations from 3 professors, and then we'll start the question and answers. We'll start with Professor Varshney. To you, Professor, you can start your presentation now.
Okay, so thank you to Asia Society for Mumbai for inviting me. I have done many events with the India Center. It's always a pleasure to return to your forum. This is probably my 7th, 8th, 9th, I've lost count. The Pew Center survey of Indian religions is the most exhaustive survey of religion in India, at least in recent years. And to my knowledge, this remark could also apply to ever. I don't think I have seen something as exhaustive and extensive. In sheer sample size, CSDS Lokniti surveys that social scientists are very familiar with now have been equal or larger, including one I've been associated with. That was the APU Lokniti survey cited in this report. But none that I know, to my knowledge, none so single-mindedly focused on religion. CSDS Lokniti is about quite a lot of politics, including religion, but no survey so extensively surveys religion as this one. So Neha and her team ought to be commended for advancing knowledge of something so salient, something so important in India. Let me say something about what surveys can do, what they can't, and then concentrate on some substantive issues. Surveys by definition.
Sorry to cut in. Could you just expand, put the full slide on the screen, as opposed to, it'll just give everybody a better view.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. That's perfect.
Right? Yeah.
Thanks.
Surveys by definition provide a snapshot. They are about breadth, not depth. That's by definition. That's the exercise. Also, some questions raise standard issues of reliability. For example, surveys are very bad. Some are less bad, some are truly bad, some are maybe slightly good at dealing with questions of discrimination. And I say this with years and years of experience in this. But for a lot of issues, we get the best information on a scale not possible otherwise. Surveys also do not interpret causes or history. That is for analysts to do, given the data about the snapshot and their previous knowledge about the issues covered in the survey. So I address in that spirit only one issue. There's a lot that can be analyzed, but only one I will analyze: the relationship between India's national identity and its religious, caste, and linguistic diversity, which is also the title picked by Asia Society for this panel. And so you can call it my presentation, The Paradox of Indian Identity. And you'll see how previous work is being now brought into focus, and this report analyzed in relation to the previous work. The Pew Center report reinforces what has not been emphasized in the popular commentary thus far. The report uncovers the paradox of Indian identity, that the centrality, that despite the centrality of religion and caste in India's social and political life, there is a larger, what scholars have called superordinate civic identity that exists. It is layered, this superordinate identity is layered on top of the building blocks of caste and religion. India's freedom struggle sought to create this superordinate identity. And if you look at what Gandhi, Nehru, Congress Party, and many others did, especially between 1920 and 1947, they were trying to create turn a civilization called India into a political unit called India, a civilizational identity into a political identity. That was the challenge they took upon, and they did, as you can see now, is even 70 years later, a fairly remarkable job. Not a perfect job, but a fairly remarkable job. Caste and religion data show the high incidence of bonding, another scholarly phrase I'm using, as opposed to bridging. That is, bonding within religious and caste communities, not bridging across those boundaries, a term that Robert Putnam has introduced in using sociology into political discussions, bridging and bonding. Indians prefer to live in bonding neighborhoods. They make friends within their religion and caste. They marry overwhelmingly inside their community, that sociologists call endogamy. And they even want strict prohibition against interreligious or intercaste marriages, that sociologists call exogamy. So that's the bonding and segregation data that this report in my view, so convincingly and impressively brings out. But an overwhelming proportion of Indians, 82 to 88%, also say that being truly Indian means, this is in only 2 or 3 pages in the report, but it's very revealing. 82 to 88% Indians across India say that being truly Indian means respecting the army, respecting countries' institutions and laws, respecting all religions, respecting elders, and standing for the national anthem. Region-wise, only in the East and Northeast, the proportions are lower across all these categories, but not catastrophically so. 70 to 83% instead of 82 to 88%. And for some questions, to be technical, this may not satisfy the standards of statistical significance, but it's just slightly lower, not catastrophically lower for the East and Northeast. And religion-wise, only Muslims and Christians score lower, but not astronomically so, slightly so, right? Slightly so. That it's still quite large, 72 to 81%, as opposed to 82 to 88%. Indians, in other words, want to be both Hindus and Indians, Muslims and Indians, Christians and Indians, and so on and so forth. Being an Indian is a hyphenated identity. There aren't too many unhyphenated Indians. This is a result. This is a survey result that you have in many other such exercises, including another famous one with which CSDS is associated, that was used in a book called State Nations. India is a state nation as opposed to a nation state. India is, in other words, now I'm using some nationalism theory here, comparative nationalism theory. India is not like France, which allows no hyphens. Jews exist in France. The term Jewish French does not exist. Does not exist. Actually, it's illegal. It's criminalized if you use it in politics and in public life. North African Muslim French, the term does not exist, is not recognized legally. Everybody is French. India is closer to the American concept of national identity, according to nationalism theory, as opposed to popular conceptions. France is the ultimate melting pot, not the US, which is a political melting pot, but a cultural salad bowl. That is the best way, according to nationalism theory, to describe the United States. The latter concept allows hyphens to exist. There are Irish Americans, Italian Americans, Latino Americans, Jewish Americans, Asian Americans, Indian Americans, so on and so forth. Black Americans, white Americans, so on and so forth. So sometimes the term melting pot is used for the United States. Nationalism theory basically says it's a political melting pot. The right side of the hyphen it represents the melting pot. The left side of the hyphen maintains cultural distinctiveness. But India's hyphenation is not yet structured beyond the possibility of rupture. As many as 65% Hindus believe that to be a true Indian, you have to be a Hindu. And nearly 50% believe that to be a true Indian, you have to be both a Hindu and a Hindi speaker. If this proportion grows further, the superordinate civic identity will rupture. But this will basically depend on the political process. Democratic politics are fundamentally open-ended. So long as India remains a democracy, pushes and pulls of politics will strengthen or weaken this existing reality, this existing snapshot that the Pew Center and Neha have captured. These numbers, in other words, are not cast in stone. At this time, the South, this report confirms, and scholars believe, and political observers believe, is leading the charge against Hindu is equal to India or Hindi is equal to India. And the report makes it very clear. The South is very, 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 very different, dramatically so. That is 24% of India. Parts of the East, we know, have also joined the pushback. And if Neha could give us state-wise figures, perhaps this will show up in the Bengal data. She gives us region-wise figures. She has state-wise figures also. If she can release them or she can allow scholars to access them, then we can get data on this. what happened in Bengal also is against Hindu is equal to India and Hindi is equal to India. If the pushback expands further, Hindu equal to India, Hindi equal to in India, politics will be weakened and the superordinate identity will become stronger. If the pushback is crushed in politics, a civic rupture can easily come about and the consequences can be alarming. I can talk about in Q&A if necessary. That, however, is not preordained. Politics will matter. The numbers in the next Pew Center report can be quite different 5 years from now, certainly 10 years from now. The numbers may go up in the direction of Hindu equal to India and Hindi equal to India, in which case the civic identity will face a very serious rupture, the superordinate identity. Or the numbers could go down for Hindu equal to India and Hindi equal to India. That is ultimately going to be determined by the kind of politics that we will see in the next 5 to 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Professor Varshney. That was truly fascinating. I have many questions, but we shall push those a little later. We have now a presentation from Professor Srinivas. Please go ahead, Professor.
It's an honor to be with you all at the Asia Society. Namaste. Good morning. Here from Boston. Like Ashutosh, I'm pleased and honored to follow him because he gave us such a sort of synthetic view of the wonderful work that the Pew Foundation has done in laying out for us religion and caste metrics and how Indian identity is being formed in relationship to these sort of central identity markers that have been present in medieval through to modern India. What I was very taken by a couple of sort of metrics within the survey, and I'll speak to them more carefully. As Neha pointed out, Indian adults across religions seem to agree that respecting all religions is fundamental to being Indian. But as she also pointed out, contradictorily, they seem to suggest that separation is equally important, as Ashutosh also mentioned. And as an anthropologist, a social anthropologist, sociologist, I'm interested in what that paradox reveals about being Indian. And since Ashutosh beautifully used food metaphors in thinking about Indian identity, I want to ask you, is India actually a thali meal, where we sample from different cultures, but the meal is uniquely how we constitute it, what we eat with each other is uniquely individual. And so while the cultural array of different identities is available to Indians, how they see themselves in relationship to this cultural array becomes very important. Now, I want to sort of point out that while surveys like the Pew, which is a very large and extremely in-depth survey, are not causal in that they do not cause social structure, nor do they cause social change. In fact, they may be determinant and set a view of how we see ourselves. So is religious pluralism important to us? What do we understand by it as Indians? How do we negotiate it? And what does it mean to be plural religiously? And to think about caste and religious hierarchies, what role does hierarchy actually play? Who is at the top? Who is at the bottom? How do we relate across these hierarchies? Become very important to understand ourselves as Indians. So is plurality essential to an Indian identity? Or can we live our lives sort of vaguely seeing other people in our neighborhood, but not consciously interacting with them, not eating their food, not speaking with them accessibly? So is plurality endemic to India? Or is it something that we see through sort of a window and not really pay attention to. Now, my work for the past 20 years has been largely as an anthropologist of Hinduism. I write about Hinduism in the South, and so I fall into that category of political rupture that Ashutosh spoke about, into that sort of cartographic region that pushes back against the idea that Hindi is the national language. To be Hindu is to be Indian. But prior to this work, I had written about syncretism, that is the melding of religions in India. That Indian cosmopolitanism is unique in that it takes from different religions and it takes from different cultures. And in this, I used a very famous example, which is very, I'm sure, familiar to those of you from Mumbai, and that is Shirdi Sai Baba. And I use him as an exemplar, though of course I'm sure as Indians we are all familiar with small Babas in various villages and Muslim fakirs in various neighborhoods who have very similar biographies. That is, they evolve as a guru figure within one particular religion, but they draw culturally from the sort of thali meal of religions in India. And they invariably have devotees of another religion. So we get Shirdi Sai Baba, who starts out as a Muslim fakir, but has, as you can see from this early photograph in 1908, Hindus as his primary followers, Marathas and Hindus. And so, as I said, we have this deep capacity for religious pluralism and syncretism, which the survey sort of nuancedly points to. But as an anthropologist, I'm very interested in because it points to not a political identity, but a lived identity. And a lived identity for an anthropologist is as important as a political identity, because the way people live informs their politics, their ontology, which is a fancy academic word for their way of being. And here is Shirdi Sai Baba again as the Muslim fakir figure. The second piece of data that caught my eye was that minorities do not want or do not accept other followers as neighbors. And this speaks to, I think, the complexities of our way of living. And from my neighborhood in Bangalore, I can say that that there is a sort of hesitancy to have Hindus to have Muslims as neighbors and vice versa, primarily because of food smells and of the way women are treated or by the other community. And so, as Professor Varshney pointed out, endogamy, marrying within one's caste group and within one's religious group, is sort of almost a cultural enforcement in India. And yet we see breakthroughs. Let me give you an example in Bangalore. The city I grew up in, or the way I lived my life, was a plural city, in the fact that the spaces of the city are built by people of different religions. Bangalore is known to have the fortress of Tipu Sultan, who fought the British, the most successful sort of anti-colonial figure. And the spaces of the city are around sort of landmarks that were built by Muslim rulers. The parks still are Mughal garden style. So I want to point to the fact that though we think about identity in one way, the spaces we use are built by Christian rulers, by Muslim rulers, by Hindu kings. And so we have an eclectic sense of the city as we move through it. We may think of religiously segregated neighborhoods as one way we experience the city, but all Indians experience a variety of spatial and cultural spaces in every city and village they live in. And this, I think, is a feature of modern India, because if you look at a famous Indian sociologist, Abhinandan Srinivas's work, he does talk about the village being divided by occupation. And it is when Indians move away from the village and they move into more urban spaces, they start encountering the other. And as you know, we are a very young urban country, and therefore encountering the other is still fraught with difficulty. We still find the other difficult to handle. We don't like the smell of their food. We don't like the way they look, perhaps. But that is part of an adjustment to a modern identity. And the third piece that I want to bring to your attention is precisely this endogamy and exogamy, that Indians do not want to marry outside their kin group, do not want to marry outside their caste group, do not want to marry outside their religion. And a lot of this has to do with basically familial culture. That the fear is that if you marry outside, not only the larger political fear might be you're diluting the religion or you're diluting the family honor, but it's also how will you adjust to another's way of life. And in this, I want to bring a procession that happens every year for the past 400 years in Bangalore. It's called the Karga Procession. It moves through the city and it's thought of as a dominant Hindu procession. Here in the center, you can see, this was 2 years ago, before COVID, the man is carrying a series of pots covered in jasmines. And this is considered a Veerashaiva, that is a Kshatriya procession, a military procession. It starts at the Dharmaraja, it starts at a temple, the Dharmaraja Kovil, but it is essentially an understanding of a military identity that covers religion. That is, it moves from a temple to a dargah. And this is common also with many processions in India, that they move through inter-religious spaces and connect these religious groups. So while, yes, we don't perhaps still like to marry the other, in point of fact, this might be evidence of an over-familiarity with the other. That we actually connect culturally, perhaps not yet ready for what might be Western understandings of true cosmopolitanism, that is marrying across religious lines. So, and lastly, I want to close with thinking about Hindus who see Hindu and Indian identity as unitary, that they are both allied to one another. And they are a form of sort of political identity as well. And I want to go back to what I said initially, that surveys are not causal. All this, as Ashutosh pointed to, is changeable. And I'm sure Rajeev will speak more about this with his wonderful work on Indian secularism. All this is changeable. And in my presentation, I wanted to point to threads of pluralism that are deep and alive and well in India, and which are frequently ignored because they're thought of as constructivist or small or not mattering, and yet they matter at a very important level for our lived understanding of ourselves as Indian. And so I don't see the identity as contradictory at all. Ironically, I see it as synthetic, that when you answer a survey, you present your ideal world, your as-if world, the world that you would like to see, and the world that you believe morally you are good at. So I'm a perfect Hindu. I don't marry Muslims. I don't eat the non-vegetarian food, whatever you want to put there. But in actual fact, the way you lived your religion, you might go and pray at infant Jesus. So I think there is a great sort of productive gap between what people will say to a survey and how they live their lives. And in that gap, I see a vibrant, dynamic space for to present this as if world, this future world of India, which is to me a plural world, a 21st century powerhouse of pluralism. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Srinivas. That again was extremely interesting, and I've noted down a couple of questions, that those can wait. And we have many questions in the question and answer box as well. I repeat, just put your questions in the question and answer box and on the chat box. It just makes it easy for us. Please go ahead, Professor Bhargava, who has a presentation, not a PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm also extremely honored to be part of this panel and to be back on Asia Society on the stage of Asia Society. And I'm sorry I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but I don't think I need one. So I hope you will bear with what I have to say. First of all, I think you must hold your breath, because I'm going to reveal something which probably is not known to many people, and even not known to Ashutosh. And that is that the first survey on religion and state was conducted by me, in the sense that I designed the questionnaire, and with the help of my CSDS Lokniti colleagues, I, had conducted the survey. The focus was exclusively religion and secularism. And this was in 2014 and 15. I shared this data apart from a few colleagues of mine. Of course, Lokniti already had the data. But apart from a few colleagues, I shared it with my friend, Alfred Stepan. And we were to write a joint paper. He wrote the first draft, but then unfortunately he passed away. And this put me off and I shelved it. But the data is all there. The full paper is not published. But now we have two surveys and we can compare them. And that's a real advance in our knowledge of religiosity in India, and on the relationship between religion and state and religion and nation. So this is a very welcome thing that has happened. Pew Research has to be congratulated, and we must get together and compare notes, and I'm sure we'll find lots of very interesting similarities and equally interesting dissimilarities. So, first thing, living together separately. I mean, that's the title of the paper that's been published. The name which has been given to, the broader name that has been given to the organized set of findings. And the first thing I'd like to say is that this is, living together separately is a modern urban trend. Most cities in the world encourage this kind of living together separately. And this is not true of only individuals. Individuals don't like to live in communities anymore. They live as relative strangers. Their neighbors are strangers. And if they live as communities, these communities are pretty much strangers to each other. I mean, we can think of New York. There's a Jewish quarter, there's a Chinatown, there's an Indian suburb, and this is true of New Delhi as well. I mean, there are no thickness of bonds here. There is much less warmth. The density of networking is very low. The connections between communities is very loose. So one can say that this is a kind of a live and let live situation, which is the modern idea of toleration. It's sort of togetherness, but togetherness bordering on indifference. So is this the same kind of living together separately, or is there something different? Now, I think we can go in two different directions. As I said, it's living together as strangers, but this, if pushed a little further, can result in estrangement. So, you can have some kind of hostilities towards one another, but you keep them in check. There isn't really respect for one another. You can say that there is mutual disrespect. And this is also found in, older European notions of toleration, where the idea is that even if you dislike someone else, even if you find, what he does or she does is very disturbing and even repugnant, you shall refrain from interfering in their activities. And that's the idea of toleration that developed in Europe in the 16th, 17th century. And so apart from this, modern idea of toleration, you can have this, you can say that this is what is happening in India. We have this negative toleration, and sometimes this negative toleration breaks down and we have hostilities out in the open. But there is a second possibility, and that is that we still have a relation of some kind of a hierarchical complementarity. So we live together, and we sometimes establish relations which of warmth and there's greater bonding, but this is all within a framework of unequal relations. So there is some kind of respect, but this is not equal respect. It is all within established inequalities. And these established inequalities, paradoxically, allow us to live together. We each find some place which is ours, even if it's lower than or higher than the other. So this is another thing that still might happen. And what we see, I think, is this is a massively transitional phase. There are some hierarchies which are breaking down, and with that respect, older notions of respect and older notions of positive toleration. But new ideas of let and live are also around. But we have always the possibility of the breakdown of even this negative negative toleration of the modern urban toleration, and people sort of break into some kind of hostilities. So I think I would like to explain this broadly, and then I'll finish this presentation. I'd like to say that we are moving from what we might call a pre-religion society to a post-religion society. And by post-religion society, I mean a society that is shaped by notions of religion that crystallized in the 16th, 17th century Europe, religion with a capital R. And since the 19th century, India is also partaking in this notion. It is also participating globally in this new idea of religion. And as a result, it is undergoing a process of religionization. And as it gets more and more affected by religion, it becomes a post-religion society. So we have these, so the older pre-religion society is one where, the feelings of, there are ethical communities, but these ethical communities are not very strongly bounded. There are multiple ways of fulfilling these ethics, which all sort of coexist. Some of them are God dependent, some are gods and goddesses dependent, and some are independent of God. I mean, so you have these multiple ethical communities, but there is no relationship between these communities, no tight relationship between these communities and what we might call norms of social interaction, which are deeply hierarchical, which are based, as Tulsi pointed out, on familial ideas and also on caste ideas. So these are, but nobody ever says that only a Hindu must be a member of this caste. Somebody can be a Muslim, a Christian, and among Hindus, there can be several, multiple attachments to different gods. All of them can coexist as long as there is some uniformity in social interaction, right? That's something that was there in the past. What exists now is a slow process of bounded communities, so separate, distinct communities. Each of them has a very clear idea of what their core beliefs and practices are. There are identities which are no longer fluid but categorical. People don't have multiple attachments, but they have one attachment to one particular set of beliefs and practices, or one God. It's not easy to move from one to the other. And moreover, there is a very tight connection between one ethical community and norms of social interaction, that is to say, a social community. So it's all one system. And this is a process that is taking place right now, but it's not complete. And it is in this flux that you have this very interesting but somewhat contradictory data of people both wanting to live separately and sometimes break into hostilities, but also have notions like we must, have respect for one another, and we must tolerate one another. And this is not something which is merely pragmatic, but is a constituent part of our identity. So this is something that we are taking from the older social imaginary, but there is something new that is happening. And it is this very strange mixture, this hybrid phenomena, which is causing, all the turbulence and all the hybridities that one is seeing today. So I think it's this framing that you find reflected in this survey, and I'm glad that this survey is done, because a lot of things which were lying implicit have been brought out and made more explicit, for which people like us can now provide, as Ashu and Tulsi have both pointed out. It's a job of analysts to provide causal explanation. So we have to think hard about this, and we will hopefully produce something as more and more such data comes out. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bhargav. So I actually just had one question of mine before we take so many others. And how we'll do this is that there are four of you, and I'm sure the questions may not be for all four, but yet you may have insights to give on each. So I'll leave it to you. Just let me know if you have something to add to any of those questions. Otherwise, we can just spread them out amongst all of you. But if I may start with the first one, though, Professor Bhargava, I'm guessing you mean that this is in a flux, but there will be no completion because it will keep changing depending on how the world order moves. And there is no, I guess, complete point. But this one slide was interesting. This is the slide that says, among members of the scheduled caste, the percentage who say in the last 12 months, they personally have faced discrimination because of their caste. Now, I saw the highest number was the South. And the question I have, and whoever can take it, I'm sure all of you will have some insight to give. One of the largest, at least when you read political history of India, one of the most significant anti-caste movements in India was Periyar's movement. And I saw that, I was like, really, because you're used to seeing, especially if you're a Bollywood consumer like I am, the caste angle, like films like Mandela and stuff, you see a lot of them coming from the South, and the caste hegemony you see more in the North. So does that mean that political movements have little or no impact on the social realities of India, and political movements are more, like the movement of the rise of Hindutva, these laws that Assam is proposing, of the leaders actually followers and not the other way around? Can anyone explain it? I mean, it's very counterintuitive when you look at it from the political history point of view. So whoever wants to go first? Neha, you want to go first, and then we'll...
No, I think I'm going to let Ashu go first because he's written about this. Ashu, go ahead.
So this is actually where you need to interrogate what the survey data found and ask why you get this very counterintuitive result. Over 30% Dalits, so 31, 32% Dalits in southern India, saying that they have faced discrimination the last 12 months, and something like 10 or 11% or 9% in central India. I hope everyone has noted that the North in this project, in the Pew Center survey, is Punjab, Rajasthan, Haryana, Himachal Pradesh, does not include UP. Central is UP and MP, and Chhattisgarh. That is their category, right? And Central excludes Bihar. Bihar is part of East in the survey. Bihar and Bengal and Jharkhand and Odisha are East in the survey. So once you see what's going on here, then the North is also both on caste and religion. North is reporting much more caste and religious discrimination than Central India, and South is reporting much more. So why does this happen? And a lot of us who study discrimination, it's a very sensitive matter. Asking someone, have you been discriminated against, or your child has been discriminated against in school? I've done this for years and years. If you feel you're free to speak on this matter, somehow you've reached a point that you can freely express yourself, then you will notice discrimination much more in the data. If in Central India, in UP, the idea that in UP, people are saying that they don't feel any religious discrimination, it's a mind-boggling piece of data. It requires you to ask why that might be so, right? Given what has happened in the last 7 years, this is a mind-boggling piece of data. That means Muslims are unable to say or unwilling to say that there is a lot of discrimination is clearly an interpretation you should investigate. There was an article written by Asim Ali, I think, I'm not sure, the CPR guy, just as the report came out, who used to report for The Hindu from Western UP. He's describing his lived reality to you and saying how, as a Muslim, it's becoming very hard now to report for him. Right? In Meerut, in Muzaffarnagar, in Aligarh, in Bulandshahr, right? So what people end up saying about discrimination, religious or caste, depends a lot on how freely they can speak about it, right? And that's why you're getting this completely counterintuitive result. Caste liberation has gone very far in southern India. There is no doubt about it. This is not a contestable matter compared to the North. This is not a contestable matter. It's settled, right? And therefore, for Dalits in Tamil Nadu or Andhra, to some extent, there are only two states of, you can say only two states of South India which have somewhat northern patterns. Only two, Karnataka and Telangana, for a whole variety of historical reasons. But not Andhra, not Tamil Nadu, not Kerala, no. Right. So you shouldn't get this result, but you're getting it because those people are more freely expressing themselves than Muslims and Dalits in UP, Madhya Pradesh, and arguably Rajasthan. Please note that Punjab has only 2% Muslims, though it has the largest concentration of Dalits in India. The so-called Mazhabi Sikhs alone would be about 35% of Punjab. It has the largest concentration of Dalits, and you show some 40% Dalits, I think, in Punjab, which is correct, in the north, which will be driven by this result of Punjab, old Punjab, which will include Haryana and would also include Himachal Pradesh. Right? So that's my response to you. How freely you can speak about some very sensitive matters, right? When you're being surveyed, it comes out much more deeply in anthropological research, because in anthropological research you concentrate on one part of the town, one village, or two towns, or one part of the country. You don't go, you spend more time with your not 45 minutes. You end up spending hours with your informant, and that's how you uncover discrimination. You don't uncover discrimination easily through surveys.
I'll add one thing from a data perspective to Ashu's comments, which I actually do agree with. We also find, when it comes to discrimination in the United States, we find that among immigrant communities, for example, Muslim Americans, a heavily immigrant community, younger generations perceive more discrimination than older generations, which is once again a really counterintuitive result, because their parents are immigrants, first-generation immigrants, a number of younger people born in the US, second generation. How are they perceiving more? How are they saying they're more discriminated against? And I think, again, it points to Ashu's point. I mean, there's one additional issue we have to consider is a society's perception of what is discrimination also depends on what it perceives to be fair. Right? So now you have in the South, the flattening of caste hierarchies, a different concept of what fairness is as far as caste discrimination, as far as caste is concerned. And therefore you get similar to how younger generations of immigrants in the US are perceiving more discrimination, you see perhaps it's the same dynamic.
So I guess there's a certain normalness to it is internalized. I mean, it's similar to when there's an increase in FIRs on assaults on women. Isn't necessarily because the assaults have gone up, but women are more empowered to actually lodge the FIR, and thanas are more bound to get that. Professor Srinivas, Professor Bhargava, you have a take on this as well?
Well, I'll just say one thing, that if you design your surveys well, meaning thereby that if you actually spend more and more time on the questionnaires, and if you do your surveys more frequently over a long period of time, you can actually grasp the nature of discrimination in societies far better. So I would say that it's not it's not true that surveys can't capture this at all. I think they can if you keep refining your questions. There are all sorts of indirect ways in which you can grasp what's happening in societies, even if you're there for 45, 50 minutes. If the same person who has conducted the survey 5 years ago goes back to that to the same village, and even if he spends 50 minutes or an hour, he would be able to gather much more than someone who just does it for the first time and stops.
Also, if you see the age group, the distribution of at what age they feel more slighted, is it the olders who feel it more frequently, or the younger? Professor Srinivas, you want to go?
Yes.
You'll need to unmute yourself. Yeah.
If I may jump in, to follow both Ashutosh, Neha, and Rajeev, to follow all three of them, I think there are two things. And Ashutosh pointed to this when he said anthropologists spent years in the field. I think in the South, the anti-caste movement has been so long and so deep that lower castes and scheduled castes and Dalits have the empowerment to speak. They also have the education. They're linked into global circuits of anti-racial, decolonial, anti-caste movements. Whereas people in so-called, what the Pew has called the North and the Central, may not be so linked in. So they have the language to say, yes, I am discriminated against. Yes, this is a microaggression. Yes, I'm educated about this, and I see it for what it is. Now, I am very hesitant also as an anthropologist to ventriloquize the Dalits. No shade, as my students would say, no offense to the people on the panel, but we are not representative of India. There is no Muslim on the panel, there is no Dalit on the panel. We can speak, but to speak for people who are not representing themselves, I think does enormous harm. No matter how liberal and how inclusive we choose to be or we want to be, I cannot speak for someone whose lived experience shows discrimination on a day-to-day basis. And I want to be very clear about that.
Sure. Thank you. Great point, Professor Srinivas. Now, the first two questions are from Mudit Jain and Nandan Maluste, and they are data related. So, Neha, since you're one of the authors of the report, why don't you take them? One is your sample size of 29,000. The question is it too small for a country like India, which is broken up into so many regions and subcastes? I see Professor Varshney shaking his head in disagreement, but we'll let him come after Neha has said her piece.
We can let Asha go first.
Sorry, let me just take, there's one more, you can just take both together.
Yeah, go ahead.
And that because India, uniquely India, while data sets may work for other countries, because it is not homogeneous in its culture and region and religion, specifically for India, is it not enough?
I think part of it is people with surveys. Like, this is one of my biggest frustrations as a survey researcher and talking about survey data in a public-facing role, as I have. Sample size is not the end-all and be-all of surveys. You can talk about even very diverse countries with a smaller sample size. We could have done this survey with 15,000 sample size, and probably if we did the survey well, the results wouldn't be that different from the 30,000 results. Of course, the margin of error would be different. What is most important with surveys is how the sample is constructed. Sample size is less important. The probability-based sample distribution is the most important thing with surveys. Why we did 30,000 in India was because it's a diverse country and we wanted to be able to talk about the opinions of even small religious groups. And the different regions. That is the reason for the larger survey size. If we just wanted to talk about Indians in an aggregate level, at the national level, perhaps the opinions of maybe Hindus, Muslims, then we could have done that in roughly 15,000 as well. It's more a matter of the probability-based distribution, the weighting. Those are by far more important to sample quality than the sample size. But I'll let Ashu add on to this.
Professor Varshney, you had
Yeah,
on
so
that.
I think that's fundamentally correct. I mean, first of all, 30,000 is a huge sample. In America, we do election surveys on the basis of 3,000. America is 1/4 as large, and you can multiply that by 4 to follow the same principles of randomization. You'll get about 12,000 in India, but because India is much more diverse than United States, you need larger sample sizes. 30,000 is the maximum I recall that Lokniti national election studies reached, 29,000, 28,000. And with that kind of size, I don't know what the size of Rajeev's survey on the basis of which he wrote a draft with Al Stepan. I don't know what the size was, but the 30,000 allows you to talk about regions and even states. It doesn't allow you to talk about districts and villages separately. For that size, you'll have to go to Access India kind of sampling. Access India sampling in Bombay, it goes into 200,000 and 300,000 when they do election surveys. They can get down to a level of detail which 30,000 won't allow, but 30,000 would allow you to talk about regions and states. You can give any number of examples for that. That's good enough, given India's diversities. And yes, diversities have to be made part of the sampling design, as Neha rightly points out. Even then, you will leave out Jews and you will leave out Parsis because they're too small. Even after you've taken care of lots of social categories, you will not be able to cover them with 30,000. You'll probably need 100,000 to 200,000 for you to reach that level of a micro community or small community, right? So 30,000 is plenty. It's perhaps more than enough, but certainly enough to generalize about regions in India, not just India.
Thank you, Professor Varshney. There's just one question. Someone wants to know where they can get the report so they can read it. Well, you can actually go to the Pew Forum website. I'll post the link in the chat box. You can just click on it and you can access it on the Pew Forum website. Now, there are two questions, and one is, does casteism in India play an important role in the political leader selection? And the second, Neha, this is an interesting one, was the question whether they are religious or secularist asked. Now, I guess by secularist, that's another word. I don't know if it's interchangeable with atheist, but I did hear on a podcast recently that in the US survey, atheism was the 5th or 6th number of in the surveys that they conduct on religiosity and what religion you identify with was number 6 till I think 20 years ago, and they conducted one I think last year, and it is number 2 and very close to Christianity. So that's how much it's gone up. So was that an option in this survey in India, or because we didn't see any people who say I don't identify with any religion? Did you see that?
Yeah, I mean, we asked the same question we ask in the US. So the results you're talking about are from our work, and I think there's one other organization, PRRI, that also does work on religion in India, and all surveys have shown in the US. All surveys in the US have shown a massive rise in the people who identify as no religion. It's the same question in India. The way we frame our religion question is, what is your current religion, if you have one? So we allow people to say they don't have one. And in India, we ask people, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, etc., and then we say no religion. We don't break it down to atheist, agnostic, no particular religion. That's what we do in the US. The reason being, in India, the terms are less familiar. We get a very small share of people who say they have no religion. That's true for us. It's also true for the Indian census. And we follow largely, the similar answer options as the census. And the other thing to note in India is the Indian census over time has shown hardly any growth in the share of people who say they have no religion. It's a very stable number. We also don't see over time any decline in the share of people who say religion is very important in their life. So of course, this is a snapshot in time, but we did ask people, how important was religion to you when you were growing up? How important is it now? And basically it's stable. You see a 4 percentage point decline, which is very little. South, you see a greater decline. It's 8 percentage points in the South. And you do see some evidence of secularization in the South. Fewer people saying they pray daily, for example, or go to temple daily. Of course, there are other forms of religiosity that still stand out in the South. So the reason you're not seeing too many people identifying as atheist or with no religion is not because we didn't ask the questions, because very few people identify, and that's true for us. It's true for the census. It's also true for CSDS.
Could I come in?
Can I say something about that?
Go ahead, Rajeev.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Professor Bhargava.
I would say that there is a decline in atheism because of this process of religionization in India. I think more and more people have begun to say, and perhaps even believe, that there is one God, and they worship that God. So there is a consolidation of what we might call inclusive monotheism, right? This is a point that is made even in the Pew survey, that a lot of people believe that there are many gods, but all these gods are manifestation of one God. And this idea has really grown in India. So we've moved away from radically pluralist societies, the polytheistic societies, as well as from atheism, right? Because I mean, there is a lot of evidence that the Buddhists, the Jains, and a lot of the Vedic ritualists, legitimized by Mimamsa and also, by other philosophies, they were all atheistic. So I would say that people have unlearned the expression of the confident expression of atheism in India, and as they become enamored of the idea that there is one religion which they must have, and they must one God, and so on. So Jains are traditionally atheists, but if you ask any Jain today, I think all of them would say they believe in God.
Right. Professor Varshney,
the comparative research on religion all over the world basically shows that as societies modernize, there are basically two historical models available. One is the so-called process of disenchantment that the term Weber used to describe what was happening in Europe even 100 years ago. And that has become deeper in Europe. That is to say, Europe has moved to what might be called a post-religion society today, where very few people have faith in religion. And incidentally, the numbers tell you that that's happening even in Italy and Ireland, even those two places where you would expect religiosity to be quite high. That's happening. There are still many more religious people in Italy and Ireland than in Northern Europe or England or Scotland, etc., France for sure, and Sweden, etc. But the numbers have declined precipitously even in Italy and Ireland. So that's the Weberian process of disenchantment. American notion of modernization has not led to a post-religion society. You're right to point out that the number of atheists has gone up, but it has not outstripped religiosity. Religiosity remains a very, very serious feature of American life. Now, there are important explanations for why that is so. I don't think we'll have time to go into that. But basically, American modernity is not about disenchantment. American modernity is about using religion for modern purposes, as opposed to losing faith in religion. And these are American modernity is not Weberian at all. It's a very different kind of modernity. It's not a post-religion society at all.
Abhinandan, I'd like
to... one second, Professor Bhargava, if I could just go to Professor Srinivas. I think she had something to say on this.
I just wanted to add to what Rajeev and Ashutosh said, and I think you can view Indian society. I think Ashutosh put it very well. There's a plummeting of religious faith in Europe, and a rise, in, if not metrically, certainly a rise in feeling in the United States. And I think you can look at India as a thin layer of Europe overlaid over 90% of America. Because you see the elite of India are highly secular, and there's a plummeting of faith. But the large proportion of India still believes in religion, caste. And so you see this thin Europe on top of a huge America. That is the reality of India. And this is why
very well put.
The secular elite are so sort of disconnected in a sense with the political realities of India. They don't engage in the battle. I mean, they may comment on it, but they are not the people usually from which the real politic is drawn.
Correct. Yeah, I agree.
Can I just come in here?
Go ahead, Professor Bhargava.
This is in response to Ashutosh. I think it's well to keep in mind a distinction between disenchantment and secularization. If by secularization we mean stopping the belief in God and so on. So disenchantment only means that we do not see the world as imbued with God's purpose or God or meaning or value, that there is no mind embedded in the world. So once you stop believing in all these things, you can say that the world is disenchanted, but you can still believe in God and in this disenchanted world. That's what happened in Europe. People started to believe in one, God as a supervening, supervisory entity who has created the world, and now the world works in accordance with its own laws. So, people were perfectly theists, but they began to believe in a disenchanted world, which were absolutely crucial for the emergence of science and for industrial revolution. I don't think India is in any way, only a very small part of India is disenchanted. It's never been disenchanted. It's always been an enchanted world. We've always believed in, spirits moving in and out. We believed in, gods and goddesses affecting things in the world. We believe that meanings and values are sort of there in the world. Everything for us can be sacred. Nothing may be profane. I mean, all this has been true. And yet people have, had no idea that this is all because of some supervening entity called God. So I think we should keep these two separate. And I would say that America, too, is very largely undergone a process of disenchantment. I think I differ from Ashutosh here. Europe, of course, is a classical site of disenchantment, but the North Atlantic has also undergone a lot of what we call disenchantment. But that is
Canada, yes. Canada, yes. Rajeev, not United States of America. There is data will not support. Data will not support
okay.
you.
I mean, I think
we can interpret it any which way you want, but data will not support.
Belief in God is one thing, but belief in a disenchanted world is another. That's what I'm trying to say. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the data doesn't suit me. But
we actually have just another 5 minutes, and we have almost 30 questions, which you clearly won't do. So I would just encourage
Can you save those questions and send them to us?
I think
Abhinandan?
I would recommend is
questions. Always important to see what people are saying. So if you can send them to us.
So I think Inakshi and Rahul can do that, and I would suggest this should be actually a series of 3 discussions. One is too small for the kind of and this is a fascination people have, because there is a personal, a political, and a social to this, and we are all impacted profoundly in all 3 aspects. So I'll just try to take 2 or 3, and if we could just, we just have 5 minutes, so each of the panelists can give their view. So I'll just take Dinesh's question because it's in front of me. Dinesh Rana says, on the question of the ultimate loyalty to the nation, how much the origin of the religion, that is Saudi Arabia for the Muslims and Vatican for the Christians, does that play a part? As a survey showed that there exists a 10% difference between the Hindus and Muslims / Christians on the loyalty to the nation aspect. So, does the origin of the religion have a view, I guess, suggesting that Hinduism originated in India, therefore there is a but natural kind of extension of that being extrapolated to the region because it is from here. Is that typical? Is that obvious? Is that atypical? You want to go first, Professor Srinivas, and then I'll take the two gentlemen and Neha can wrap up.
Thanks, Abhinandan, for giving me the most difficult question to answer first. I think what, at least as I understand the question, religion is not a question of naturalness. That is a constructed explanation that comes, a rationalization that comes afterwards. We learn religion from watching other people religion around us, right? From our families. We're socialized into a way of belief. And so to make the argument that geographic sort of origins of religion induce naturalness, that Hinduism is natural to India because India is the location of Hinduism, I think has its reverse. I think that, yes, a majority of Indians are Hindu, but then one would say that caste is natural to India too, because India is the foundation of caste. I mean, these are social structures, they're social explanations, and that is my point of view. I think that when we get into the naturalization debate, we're arguing a political reality and an identity politics. That's a different question altogether. And sort of a rejection of Islam or a rejection of Christianity undercuts India's sort of vibrant pluralism. It makes us a thinner, poorer nation. Yes, you might argue, well, these nations give money, they involve themselves in India politics because their quote unquote people are there. But that is, I think, Ashutosh forte. I think we can think about that in terms of global politics and world religions. But I think to argue the naturalism debate is gets us into very dangerous territory of disincluding certain people who have had a long history of living in India and have contributed to the nation. And that would be like saying, well, in the American context, well, Africa is the origin point for all African Americans, and therefore they should be disincluded in America. That's a very dangerous, I don't think a profitable one too. We are a nation of all these peoples who are citizens of our country, and therefore we should think more in inclusive terms. But I will cede to the gentleman.
I must come in for a minute because I have to leave. I'm
Sure.
kicked out of my room. So no, I just give a few counter examples. You know, the Rig Veda was composed in the Swat Valley and in parts of Afghanistan. That is the origin of the Rig Veda. So I don't think it makes sense to say that there is a link between loyalty to a nation and the origin of a religion. Likewise, there are lots of sacred places in Pakistan, which are the famous, some of the most famous gurudwaras of Sikhs are not located in India; they are in Pakistan. So I mean, nobody questions Sikh loyalty simply because some of their sacred spots are in Pakistan. And finally, I mean, look at the number of Hindus now in America and in Britain. I mean, they're all American citizens, they're all British citizens, but we never question their loyalty. Nobody questions their loyalty simply because their land, the origin of their religion is in South Asia. So I think let's just not get into this. I mean, there is a lot of ideological work that goes on to create an opinion of this kind, but I think it's blatantly. I think it's first of all factually it's untrue, and it's politically dangerous because it leads to so many exclusions, which have been pointed out by people, by Tulasi.
Professor Varshney?
Rajiv is absolutely correct about this. If you go by where some the religions were born, and certainly when it comes to Hinduism, we'll have to talk about the various books rather than one book, right? And the various places of sacred significance rather than one. It's not the Vatican, it's not the Mecca and Medina, Mecca, let's say. I mean, there's a whole variety of, and a lot of in the Hindu sacred places fall in what is Pakistan, and Buddhist places fall in what is Afghanistan. Just as he's absolutely right about that. So I don't think this is, in terms of interpretation, that kind of interpretation, it's right. But notice the data also has a certain regional distribution. Yes, the Muslims and Christians are slightly lower on all India symbols, on commitment to all India symbols, slightly lower. It's not a huge difference, slightly lower. And as I said, technically speaking, if you run statistical significance tests, I don't know whether they'll show up as statistically significant. You can run chi-squares and get the result, right? I'm not sure. And that's a technical matter, and it's an important matter in any large survey. But that particular result also, the slightly below Hindus, right? The score slightly below Hindus for Muslims and Christians are driven by North, Central, and West, not driven by East and South, right? So what you see, the overall result is an artifact of that regional division that you're getting. You're getting virtually no difference between Muslims and Hindus in the East and the South. And you're getting virtually no difference. It's driven by Central India and some parts of North India. And Neha can enlighten us. It's probably Rajasthan and Haryana, which is driving that result if she didn't go to Jammu and Kashmir. It's perhaps driving that result. But Central is very clear. It's Madhya Pradesh and UP, which is where the differences are ultimately producing because of their sheer weight in the nation, their sheer weight, numerical weight, they're producing this result. So that's a technical answer to the survey results, and there is a conceptual answer that Rajiv gave you, which is absolutely correct. That so many of Sikh sacred places are in Pakistan, so many of Buddhist sacred places are in Afghanistan, and many Hindu places are also there, in Sindh, where around the Indus Valley, Sindh and stretching to Punjab.
So there is no real precedence to show any pattern to this data-wise or even convention-wise.
That's correct. On truly proud India, are you a truly proud Indian? There is no there is no difference at all between Muslims, Hindus, and Christians. They all around 88%. There is no difference at all.
Yeah, Neha, you want to? The last word is to you. What is it that about this? I think it's been thoroughly
I'll point out to the peculiarities of Indian Islam, and we've done surveys of Muslims around the world, and my very first project at the Pew Research Center was in predominantly Muslim countries in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, etc. And at that time, regrettably, we couldn't study Indian Muslims. But this time I filled the gap. This is a personal achievement for me, that we came back to India and we filled the gap. But now we can compare Indian Muslims to Muslims in the Middle East, Muslims in Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Indian Islam stands out as Indian. So if you take a look at even Indian Muslims' religious beliefs, right? They believe in heaven, hell, they believe in karma, various other things. They actually resemble Indian Hindus more so than they resemble Pakistani Muslims or Bangladeshi Muslims. So you over and over get the sense of the uniqueness of Indian Islam, which is again coupled, with what Ashu already pointed out, that in levels of patriotism and pride in being Indian and enthusiasm about Indian culture, you see Indian Muslims and Indian Hindus, again, very similar on those levels. But it's not just about that. Even when it comes to the practice of religion and religious beliefs, you see so many similarities, much more similarity between Indian Hindus and Indian Muslims than Pakistani Muslims and Indian Muslims or Bangladeshi Muslims and Indian Muslims.
Thank you. Yes, quickly, Professor Srinivas, you got to wind up.
I'll make a final concluding point. And I think what Neha and Ashu and Bhargav, Rajiv have spoken to is the fundamental culture that is India. That cultural dominance of it. We needn't even call it Hindu, we can't call it Muslim. It is a syncretic cultural form that is unique to India, and it is built of these plural ideas. And I think that is the real strength, that the dynamism that is India. I think that when Muslims say they believe in karma, that the Khatri caste is both Muslim, Hindu, Jain, I think there we're seeing the true strength of India, that it is a combination, it is a dynamic combination. And I firmly believe that no other country can claim that.
So I mean, it would be interesting to see, as Professor Bhargava said, that over time, is the flow going this way or that? Because I'm not so sure about which way it's headed, of that unique India that we're talking about. But this is, I mean, I've enjoyed this. I have found it very enriching, this discussion. I actually would request Pew and the Asia Society to maybe have a series, because there's so much I'd like to know. And I believe this report is hefty, and there's so much more that one can discuss. I've put the link to the report, the long write-up on it, from the Pew website. We have a request in the chat box, Inakshi and the Asia Society, that whenever this video, you put it up, if your database can be emailed it, and you can put it on your social media. But thank you, Neha Sahgal. Are you a doctorate professor as well? Am I the only non-professor here? No, you're not. Okay.
I am a doctor, but as my grandmother says, will a single patient ever come to you? So,
okay, Dr. Neha Sahgal, Professor Ashutosh Varshney, Professor Tulasi Srinivas, and Professor Rajeev Bhargava. This is the Nothing Abhinandan Sekhri thanking you. This has been a magnificent way to spend an hour and a half of my time, and I wish I could see much more of this. So I would urge a series on this. I found this fascinating. I'm not just saying this as I want to whenever I post something. But thank you all. Thank you for attending. Thank you, Inakshi. Thank you, Asia Society. And thank you all who did participate. And sorry we couldn't take all your questions. Have a good night.